Again? This dude again? I thought we had left Colin Kaepernick behind. I thought we were done with the founder of exploitation. To be honest with you, until a couple of hours ago, I had completely forgotten that Colin Kaepernick existed. It was so nice. It was like living in utopia. But here we are, once again talking about the man who has made millions of dollars exploiting his own community. I don't know how Colin Kaepernick shows his face in public. If I were him, I would be embarrassed. Who brags about being captain of the bomb squad? But for some reason, there is a segment of the population that enjoys to celebrate failure. We used to live in a country that celebrated winners. Today, they want to celebrate failure. Case in point, Jill Biden giving the Woman of Courage Award to a biological man. What is so courageous about a man wanting to be a woman? I don't talk about my parents too often here on the channel, but there have been a few times where I have mentioned my parents and my upbringing. I had what the jealous like to call a privileged upbringing. I grew up in the suburbs, upper middle class neighborhood, private school from kindergarten through the 8th grade. I didn't have to worry about student loans because my parents paid my college tuition. Now on the surface, you wouldn't think I would have much in common with a guy like Colin Kaepernick. However, my childhood was very similar to his. But you're not going to see me come on here and speak negatively about my parents. Even though my childhood was the best that you could ask for, it still wasn't perfect. No one has a perfect childhood. My mom and I didn't get along until I got older. If I were trying to victimize myself to fit a narrative, there are stories that I could share or fabricate, make up, that make me look like the victim while creating a negative perception of my own mother. Why would I want to do that though? What would be the purpose? Why would I want to shit on the people who not only gave me life, but gave me every opportunity to succeed in life? Why would I want to publicly humiliate them just to make people feel sorry for me? Our similar childhoods. That is the only thing I share in common with Colin Kaepernick. I consider myself to be a fighter, a survivor. Colin Kaepernick would rather identify as the victim. Please feel sorry for me. I have experienced so much mythical racism. By the time I was 5 years old, I knew I was a victim. Dude, you are not a victim of mythical racism. You're an exploiter of mythical racism. There's a difference. You can make a strong case that Colin Kaepernick is the founder of the business of mythical racism. Kaepernick rarely gives interviews to the media for obvious reasons. The guy has never been confused with Confucius. He ain't all that smart. Us normal people, we see a shovel and know its sole purpose is for digging holes. Colin Kaepernick sees a shovel and uses it for emotional support. He rarely gives media interviews because he knows that he cannot defend his position. Colin Kaepernick only agrees to interviews if they're conducted in a safe space. For example, Ebony Magazine, or in this case, CBS Mornings with Adriana Diaz. Someone Colin Kaepernick knows will not call him on his bullshit. Colin Kaepernick was adopted as an infant by Rick and Teresa Kaepernick. They immediately shared something in common with baby Colin, their white skin. Although he doesn't like to admit it publicly, Colin Kaepernick is biracial. And they also share in common their love of cucumbers. Rick and Teresa, they like cucumbers in their salad. Colin, well, you guys already know what he likes to do with the cucumber. Growing up in Turlock, California, it was tough on Colin Kaepernick. Oh, it was traumatizing. He had to make real tough decisions like, do I want to play football, basketball, or baseball? Young Colin couldn't decide, so his parents allowed him to play all three. While in high school, he received visits from scouts in Major League Baseball. But Colin's true love was football. Like most supportive, loving parents, Rick and Teresa Kaepernick, they encouraged young Colin to pursue his dream. Sounds really tough, right? Growing up in a home with two loving parents. Let's not forget, Rick and Teresa Kaepernick, they saved this kid. Last I checked, no one is forced to adopt children. Colin Kaepernick's birth mother was 19 years old when she gave birth to him. Who is the biological father? Hell if I know, no one knows. Who knows what would have happened if Rick and Teresa Kaepernick didn't step up and adopt an infant Colin Russo, as he was known at the time. He could have been raised in the system, bouncing around from one foster home to another. I'm sure there were problems for Colin Kaepernick growing up. Like I said, no childhood is perfect. But if you listen to him, you would think he grew up in a home plagued by mythical racism. Colin Kaepernick gave an interview to CBS. He's promoting his new book, Change the Game. Change what game? Last I checked, you haven't played in an NFL game since 2016. The only game you've changed is the game of mythical racism. The system where a select few get rich by victimizing their own community. Change the Game is an autobiographical book about the teenage years of Colin Kaepernick. Didn't this dude just release an autobiographical book last summer? If I remember correctly, it was a cartoon-style book designed to make it easier for grown men like Colin Kaepernick to be able to read it. That was maybe 7-8 months ago. I don't remember seeing the demand for another autobiography detailing the privileged upbringing of Colin Kaepernick. I'm sure there's as much demand for this garbage as there was for Jemele Hill's memoir. During this interview with CBS, Kaepernick, he gathered up the emotional courage to share a traumatizing story from his teenage years. Like most other teenagers in the early 2000s, he wanted to style his hair in cornrows. Growing up, he idolized Allen Iverson. Looking back at it now, it makes perfect sense. Allen Iverson was known for not showing up to practice. Colin Kaepernick became known for not showing up to NFL tryouts. Listen as he shares this horrific memory of telling his parents for the first time that he wanted cornrows. Roll the film.
His journey embracing his blackness despite resistance from many, including his white adoptive parents.
I know my parents loved me, but there were still very problematic things that I went through. I think it was important to show that, no, this can happen in your own home, and how we move forward collectively while addressing the racism that is being perpetuated.
He took cues from his icon, basketball star Allen Iverson, who he said wore his blackness like a suit of armor. And teenage Kaepernick wanted cornrows to match. He's getting what roles, his mom asked?
Oh, your hair's not professional. Oh, you look like a little thug.
Your mom said that to you?
Yeah.
Your mother not wanting you to have cornrows is not mythical racism. Your mother saying the hairstyle makes you look like a little thug, that is not mythical racism. You know how many times my mother called me a thug growing up? Probably every day for about 4 years. I sagged my pants, mom called me a thug. I talked like the rappers that I listened to, mom called me a thug. Does that make mom guilty of mythical racism? No. When my dad was growing up, his parents called him a thug because he was a hippie. He had the long hair, he wore the questionable clothing. That is not mythical racism. We used to call that a generation gap. Colin Kaepernick, he also gave an interview to NPR to promote this quality work of fiction. I can't tell you how many times he referenced his blackness. Everything is about his race. He talks about his struggles as a teenager, struggling to find his identity. And you know, I'm sure it was a struggle. I had friends in high school who grew up with adoptive parents. They also struggled with their identity. I'm sure it was even harder on Colin Kaepernick because of the racial component. But instead of using his experience to help others, he's using it to victimize himself and profit. During this interview with NPR, Colin Kaepernick said, "While I am biracial, I choose to identify as a black man. I was trying to navigate my blackness growing up with white parents in a white community. I tried to find ways to make sure my blackness wasn't stripped away from me." Look, you can choose to identify however you want. Hell, we have grown men in this country choosing to identify as garden tools. We have public schools catering to the needs of children who identify as the Purina cat. Just because you choose to identify as something does not make it reality. Colin Kaepernick, he has every right to choose to identify as a black man. But that does not change the fact his biological mother was a white woman. Anytime Colin Kaepernick is interviewed, the NFL, always a topic of conversation. Why? Hell if I know. This dude's NFL career can only be described using one word: forgettable. NPR asked him, has the NFL changed for the better in the last 6 years that you've been out of the league? Of course not! Look at me! I'm still not playing in the NFL. That is obviously an indictment on where they are. This league doesn't have the best intentions in how they choose to operate. Again, with the victimization. Again, with the poor me routine. Colin Kaepernick was given multiple opportunities to get back into the NFL. He refused to show up. Was he blackballed in 2016? Of course he was! He was tanking ratings throughout the league. As soon as the NFL got rid of the fungus, ratings went up 20%. This dude is an embarrassment. If Colin Kaepernick wants to continue embarrassing himself, if he wants to be a huge embarrassing failure, fine. He and Bomani Jones, they can play the butt bongo together. But for him to go on national television and not only humiliate his parents, but also accuse them of mythical racism, how much lower can you go? I don't know what else to say. You give me your thoughts. Colin Kaepernick publicly humiliates his parents. The two people who adopted him gave him a great childhood in the suburbs. What do they get in return? Accusations of mythical racism. Sound off in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe. Click the notification bell to receive all notifications from the channel. Best way to contact me is by email at btlkc84@gmail.com, KC_BTL84 on Twitter. I'll see you guys tomorrow.